Okay. The purpose of this meeting is to kind of talk about where we are in progress and to hear from you all about where you are on your project and kind of give an overview because Denise couldn't be here, but she wrote something. And so what I want to do is I want to start the meeting with what Denise wrote. The question is, how do I share my screen? Where do I go?
Are you on a laptop or a tablet?
What?
Are you on a laptop or a tablet? I'm sorry about the background noise.
I'm on a laptop.
I think the menu choices are on the bottom on the laptop.
Yeah, they are. Breakout rooms, chat, polls, invite, stop video, manage.
Share.
I don't
Share.
Yeah.
If you press share, it'll come with some options to bring up stuff from your computer.
Let me get out of full screen, maybe. Share. I should see share somewhere.
Should be on the bottom.
Middle of the bottom in my screen, but there you go.
Right corner in mine, but I got a tablet.
God, I see breakout room. Does anybody see breakout room?
No, but I see shares in the middle of my laptop.
Oh, I see it. Yeah.
And as well.
Great. Okay, now I go to. You all see this?
Well,
Yes.
Back. Okay, so I just got this morning, so I'm going to read it. This is what Denise just wrote. The work that emerged from this group adds an important dimension to the discussion around how organizations and large systems have intentionally or unintentionally recognized, understood, and applied complexity thinking. During the last meeting, it became evident that each individual chapter offers real differences in how the case study, and we're going to be calling it, I think, complexity study, but Prush is going to talk more about that, is being presented. Additionally, the potential deliverables from each story can provide real value to the reader's clients beyond simply being a published chapter. This prompted me to once again ask the questions we asked when we undertook the transformation of Plexus as a new professional network organizing around applied complexity thinking. What value do we offer to someone who comes to Plexus? Each time I ask the question, I find myself in the deep, deep, deep bowels of the Plexus archives, and I always emerge with some surprises. These surprises are both in the form of content and context. I also recognize the best way to demonstrate how the work on these case studies can be offered to the network and beyond is to present each as a part of a whole. Each case study is published on Plexus and provides multiple paths for adding engagement, product, or incremental content. The following list are some initial ideas, studies of complexity. The written case, a list of complex system terms, concepts that are in the case, possibly a standardized list of questions that each author will answer. And we'll talk about that. We have a format for that. An open audience pop-up with blogs, any resources the author wants to share, related resources from Plexus archives, an interview that can be recorded and included in the resources, more formal presentation with slides, a workshop or other fee-based programs. I built a template on the site that can be used for organizing framework and posting products for all projects. Here are the posting requirements. The writing should be clear. The case study or story must be described factually with supporting examples. The key points and messages that tie the case study and the actions within the case study or story should be offered clearly and overtly expressed connections to what it means to the organization and its people and recognize, understand, and work with a complex adaptive system. should include both personal and organizational learning reflections. The reader need not understand definitions or characteristics. Try to minimize abstraction. And while the case study can be a form any time period, its points must be made relevant to working within an organization or other complex systems. Writing must satisfy the purpose of writing case study for this project as discussed and defined in the project team. All pieces should be grammatically correct with no spelling errors. They should be passed a basic edit check. So I can go to this. Can everybody open up their Plexus organization, Our Work Adaptive Vision?
Yeah.
Let's go to that.
I think you have to do it because I can't copy and paste from the
Okay,
screen.
right.
I've got the hard copy in front of me.
Yeah, so do I, or you can bring it up on on your iPhone or something.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, I have to go to not.
Could be.
Why are we doing this? Just as
Well, I wanted to go through. Maybe you all have it. I want to go through the. There's a storyboard approach, and I wanted. Has everybody seen that storyboard approach?
Yes.
Okay, then I'm not going to go through it. The reason for the storyboard is how come I can't get back?
get back to what?
I don't want to share this anymore. That's right.
Drop down to share, and wouldn't you do the share button?
How do I get out of share?
Click share, see what it says.
Okay. I mean. Oh my God! I'm going nuts here. I can't.
Or exit top right. I don't know.
Hit your exit key. Hit your escape key.
Try your back button.
I'm sorry, gang. Okay, I can see you all, but I can't get out of the share, and I can't see the. I can't see the. Oh, stop share. I got it. Okay.
Okay.
Good.
So I want to give you a little bit of my experience with this review process, and Prusha is on the review committee, and she can add more to this. But it was a little chaotic in the beginning, but it's turned out to be a wonderful experience for me. So I wrote the story, and I think that the review committee had some problems with it. I mean, they basically thought the story was there, if I'm right, Prusha.
Yes.
But it wasn't coherent, and we kind of figured out when I wrote when I went through the storyboard and I filled that out, I realized there were certain things missing. I didn't talk much about my own personal recollections. I didn't talk about my own experience well. I didn't talk about clearly what it did to the organization. So when I did that storyboard, I realized there was and the reason there were missing parts is that I had written the first part of it. I written the first part of it as kind of like an introduction to the Alaska story. And the Alaska stories were very detailed, but the first part was very minor. And the Alaska story didn't have a lot of the things I just mentioned. So after really struggling with this, and it was really hard for me because I didn't quite understand where the problem was, we broke it into 2 stories. The major story was what happened to the organization and my experience in that, and the impact it had on modernizing the air traffic control system. And then I used the Alaska story as a detailed illustration of that as a separate story. That really cleaned things up. And so then I did that more, and then the review committee basically thought that really worked. And now we're in the last throes of it. Fuchsia, we're probably within a day or 2 of having it put on the website?
Well, you'll have to check with Denise, because my understanding was that she wanted to post that story at the same time she posted the Alaska story.
Okay, well, the Alaska story will come up pretty soon, because that was much easier, because, you know, the Alaska story stands on its own. I don't have to do that. So we're probably within a week of getting that on the website. Now, what the approach right now is, and this is what Denise would like, and I think many of us agree with this, is we're going to be writing separate chapters. And then after the separate chapters are all published, we're going to get back together and decide whether we want to turn this into a book. The reason is that a book is much more complicated than a set of chapters. And you know, it takes a lot of editing, and it takes a question of, do they all work together? So that's where we are now. And the purpose of this meeting is, to see if you all understand what the process is. And what I see the process is anyone who wants to do a chapter, and some of you have already started your chapter, so you don't need to do this, though I recommend it, is you go through the storyboard and tell what the story is, okay? Then the review committee gets it, and Denise gets it and says, yeah, this fits within our context. And then the author develops a draft, and the draft then goes to the review committee. And the review committee and the authors work together, and hopefully they come to an agreement. If ultimately there's some kind of big disagreement, Denise, who has the responsibility of maintaining and the website, will make a decision, you know, with the author. But I don't think it's ever going to, hopefully it will never get to the point where we have to adjudicate. One says yes and the other says no. So where we are now is that David and Bruce have pretty completed chapters. So I would just have them look at the storyboard and see if you got everything there. Connie has a pretty complete chapter. Bob Heath has I would say the beginnings of a chapter. So we're in, you know, we're coming along, and Peter Bernard has a chapter. So I would, Susan, you haven't really written the chapter yet, have you?
Actually, I have an outline that's
Yes, you have an outline.
substantially growing, and so yeah, I would it would help me if I could kind of share, you know, where I'm chunking to and from, and that way you can kind of help me.
That would be great. We'll
put it in.
that towards the end of the meeting, because I want to get.
Sure.
So we really want to start moving forward on this at a more rapid pace. It's taken us a while to kind of figure out who we are and what we're doing, but I think we're really on our way. So I want to start with David. You seem like you're pretty close.
Yeah, well, frankly, my experience was of that rather chaotic opening. I made a submission, and then I got a whole slew of comments back from different people, and some, you know, I could understand, and they were making valid points, and they helped me improve. And I responded to those. Others I wasn't so sure about. And then some of them conflicted, and I was starting to get the feeling of too many cooks are going to spoil this broth. So I'm glad to see that we have condensed all the cooks maybe into a single chef who's going to deliver the meal. I mean, I'm done. The first 60% of the book is a direct extract from my Harvard Business School Press book, so it's been through a lot of editing already. And then the last third, it's pretty straightforward. I think there are issues of the overall style of the book. One of the questions I responded to was the role of boxes, and I talked about, well, maybe we need to have the boxes in commenting and making complexity theory comments, and I never really got a response to that. So Denise's latest proposal seems to suggest a slightly different approach. I kind of list up front of what topics are covered and complexity topics are covered. So I'm quite happy to revise along those lines, but just from the case and the takeaways, I'm done.
Okay. David, could you do anything? Just look at the storyboard. And
yeah, well, I mean, the storyboard, why tell this case story? I tell you why. The purpose of this chapter is to outline the development of an ecological model.
I'm just asking you, just take a look at it and see if your story contains all that. It doesn't have to be in any order.
In the order, no, it's. I mean, I think it's covered.
Okay.
I think it's covered. I mean,
David, I think you're ready to go to the committee.
Yes, throw me to the lions.
So David, you're at the review committee stage. And
Will they start off by cleaning it up with all the existing comments and
you know what? The review committee will look at the comments that are on the.
All right. Well, as long as
You don't have to worry about that. The comments are going to be on the. All
right. Okay. As long as they integrate them, that's fine.
Yeah, they'll integrate them.
Okay. Grand.
Okay. Connie, you're pretty close too, aren't you?
I don't think so anymore.
Okay.
First of all, I want to rethink this. It doesn't fit. What I've done does not fit the current ideas for the storyboard. So I think I need to go back to square one here.
Well, I don't think square one because you have a lot of things in that storyboard that.
Yeah, I know. But when we first met, Mark, and I saw your invitation on Plexus, it asked for people to share in it from their organizational management experience when they had the light bulb of seeing that what they were doing as a manager was really a complexity theory approach, right? So when I chose my material, I'd already worked with these complexity 5 dimensions for almost 2 decades, and I knew they worked really well. I know some people, when we did the group discussion, said, well, where in the world do these come from? Well, maybe I didn't explain it well enough, but they're mine, right? And I've written and I've published on them and blah, 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 blah. But I chose situating those 5 dimensions into community service learning because that's where I had the light bulb when I started taking the Santa Fe Institute course. And I also went to a resilience conference in Arizona, and I went, aha, these dimensions are a complexity framework. So when I presented them to the group, the only person that they made any sense to was Bob. And everybody else just kept zeroing in on what were the outcomes, what were the outcomes, what were the outcomes. Well, they isn't the outcomes, it's the process. And I was giving everybody a gift. All the stories that are online that I've read, you could take those 5 dimensions and apply them, because they are complexity principles, into the work that you're doing. So obviously this was a really, really good experience for me. And I've been scratching my head because I'm in the throes of trying to write a book based on these dimensions. And I realize now, based on the feedback I got from everybody, that they aren't understood. So I think I look forward to this process, but I don't know why yet. I feel like in the adaptive cycle, I've just left the conservative stage or the rigidity trap of thinking these 5 dimensions were understood and realizing that they aren't. I don't know why Bob understood them and nobody
Hey,
else.
how are you?
But maybe Bruce, because he's steeped in this too. But they've worked. It's almost 3 decades now. So here I get this $1 million research project, and I use these dimensions to run that management project that I was director of, and it worked like crazy. So here I am meeting Mark on the Plexus website, and I am so excited about this. And it just fell apart. Like nobody was excited about it. So I'm using this. I think this is an incredible, valuable experience, and I feel so lucky that we have this group. But I feel like I have to go back to the drawing board and
Connie, do you really feel
and
you have to
reorganize.
Well,
So that's where I'm at. And I appreciate all of this.
well, do you really have to go back to the drawing board, or is it just a matter of adding certain things that we felt were not there?
I don't think so. I think I got to I wanted to share it from the moment I learned from, I read Kaufman's book, and, I was working on things like Hertzberg's principle of uncertainty, and I was talking about not knowing the difference. How some organizations focus in on position and then they miss the momentum. And I was working on the wave and I was working on all those things out of physics. And that's when I came up with those 5 dimensions, but they're not understood. And every one of them is steeped in complexity, and so I got to rethink this. And I'm relishing this opportunity because it's just plain not understood. So, I might have a separate conversation with Bob and figure out why he understood it. And maybe that'll help me to go forward. But for the rest of the group, everybody was just focused on what's the process of the community service learning. And that wasn't the point. That was just the context in which I knew for certain that this management style that I've been using for 20 years made sense in a complexity science approach. So I was pretty excited about it, but it definitely needs help.
Well,
Connie,
Just jump in and say one thing. I'm not going to try to explain Connie or anything, but this has been so exciting for me, exploring everybody's different theories and how you got to make some construct in order to understand the complexity. And I've just been amazed. I've run into some very dynamic people like you, and how opinionated folks get on what they think the structure is. And it seems like the commonality is that, well, what structure do you have, and how do we share those different ideas in a commonality? I went to that liberating structure meeting, and I was amazed of the younger folks who don't even know. There's such an array of ideas, and the stories are powerful, but the more that we can put out frameworks like all of us have, I think the more powerful it becomes. And there's work out there that is destroying or changing even some of the perspectives that we think we have figured out. That's what really excites me too.
Connie, if I could just...
Ditto, I agree, Bob, with everything you're saying. I get very excited about this.
Connie, I agreed with your principles completely. My only problem with them was that essentially they are desirable outcomes. And so create a shared purpose, cultivate inquiry, enhance external, etc. Are all absolutely, that's what you have to do, but the whats are generic, and these are generic. The hows are specific. The particular and the universal are quite separate in complex systems. And so you can't apply abstractions, because it's like trying to add detail to a digital picture that's already been reduced. And now you're trying to add detail back to it when you do the application, and that's the problem. The detail's gone. It was removed when you abstracted the principles. So the question is these, you can't disagree with these, they're all desirable, but how do I do it in my organization with these people right here, right now? And this is where I think the stories come in, the narratives come in, is that you keep on, and each one's different, just every novel, there's not one novel, there's many novels. Each one exposes you to slightly different circumstances, which may or may not resonate with what you perceive to be your condition, your situation. And so it's this whole relationship between the abstract and the particular that I think needs to be emphasized. And that's why we find in the other stories, people starting in the particular situation and then making the abstraction. That's the easy way to go. It's going from the abstraction back to the particular in a new situation. That, I think it's impossible, actually. I think you actually have to jump back into the situation with these patterns in mind, and you're trying to look for patterns. I could go on at great length, but I won't. So that was my problem with the principles. I couldn't disagree with them, but I didn't think they were, I didn't think they helped a practitioner all that much.
Okay, so just let me give you one example. This is really helpful, and maybe we can all collectively think about this. But let's start with the dimension of vision. Well, in a Newtonian positivistic world, we focus on strategic plan or planning before. But what I learned that it's more the complexity idea of the shared values that allow us to be diverse and adaptive enough to allow the adaptive cycle to move and to keep us in, as you say, David, in your book, which I've used, in the sweet zone. So I think we have to get out. It's very valuable to teach a community group, whatever their context, that if you follow a plan, a set out plan or a strategic plan, you're not really working from the mindset of complexity thinking, because you've rigidized your actions, and so you cannot assume feedback, and you cannot be adaptive. I could take Mark's case study and I could rewrite that into an adaptive cycle, and that's the complexity thinking.
But Connie, let me share something. What David is saying is, I didn't start out with a concept. I didn't start out with, here's a model, and now I'm going to go to talk about how that model fit into my case. I started out with the case. For example, you make a very big point about how universities are like castles on a hill, where they feel like they have all the knowledge and they radiate it out to the community. So that's an old paradigm. And then you talk about a new paradigm in which the university is partnered with the community and together they learn. So that is a very big point of yours, okay? So you could start out the story with how a university generally is. You find this not effective.
But even, that's great, that's helpful. But when you move to a complexity thinking, even the word partner is problematic. Like you have to change your whole vocabulary. And I've struggled with this now since.
It's okay, but the point is, I want to make David's point. You don't start out with the model. You start out with what is the problem that you're trying to deal with? What problem are you trying to solve? Are you trying to deal with the fact that the university functions in a way that's not effective? Are you trying to deal with, so, I started out with, we failed with the air traffic control system. That's the problem. We failed. Why did we fail? And then I go into a whole thing about how the air traffic control system is a complex system, not a complicated system. And the thinking we had was too limited. And then I go through examples of how what we did changed us from, okay. So
I totally understand that. And I haven't done that. So that's why I'm saying I have to go back. If this is going to be our storyboard and this is going to be our approach, then I have got to go back to square one. I know what I have to do.
Okay.
I appreciate the feedback. I just have to start over again.
So Connie, do you have any feeling for when you could get that done, or do you?
June.
What?
June, by the end of June.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Yes, Bruce.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to quickly comment. I've been making some notes as I've been hearing the last few minutes of dialogue on this. And my own sense of this is that whatever our respective stories, these are stories exactly as you said about something that happened. And the first thing that always occurs when we're experiencing something is our cognition and sense making, what we take in, what it means to us, and that is always assessed against the context of our own understanding that we've lived up till that moment of our lives, what we've been taught and learned, the values, the norms, and the constructs and the methods and tools that we've been given or that we've learned and acquired. Some of us have over time acquired that complexity perspective. Some of us have not. We may interpret and express some of these different concepts and dynamics with different words, but I would agree that what counts first and foremost is the narrative. What it is, what sense making we made of it at that time based on what we presumed and thought we knew and thought and learned that this is how we respond and react to get to a better outcome or resolve the challenge. And then what happened from our reaction. And then to me, it's also, and I certainly wrote my story explicitly in this way, given what we all know now today about the dynamics of complex adaptive systems and various tools or methodologies, frameworks for sense making and acting into complexity, as opposed to acting into complicatedness. How might we have acted differently in that story, whether it was the air traffic controllers or any other story, if we knew then what we know now? And how then can we apply and put those kinds of things into practice, which become the learning lessons for those who might read these stories? And I'll just stop there.
Yeah.
Hey, Bruce, before you
those are very valuable comments, but I didn't want to change anything because what was to me the aha moment is, my God, these things are really a complexity approach. And that's what I was trying to share, because I think they can be put in the context of any group, any organization. And that's 30 years of struggling with this in many different situations. Like, that's not the only management experience I've had with these. I just chose the one where I finally knew what I was struggling with, because I could go back to some of my earlier papers and they're actually funny, because I tried to squeeze it into social constructionism, and then I tried to squeeze it into postmodernism. I could go on and on. It was a riot. And suddenly I realized in 2010 that, my goodness, what I have discovered and what I have organically created is from a complexity mindset. So my story is a little bit different. So I don't know. I got to struggle with it. But these are all really valuable comments, and I am so lucky I have this group to help.
I think that's wonderful.
Bruce,
Yeah, Yeah. It's, sorry, it's just a bit like Moliere's character who discovers he's been speaking prose all his life. And I think that's exactly what we've discovered. Is that we've been practicing complex adaptive inquiry all our lives.
I think my point right now is probably the best time to say it. I mean, it's so much fun. I'm glad I didn't write the chapter. I'm learning the final. I'm learning so much now. And March 6th of this year was such a tipping point for me when the, because I'm a pharmacist and a physical therapist and I worked in education. But March 6th was the day that on the front headlines of the USA Today came out a new drug called Spravato or esketamine, 2 nasal sprays, and it cures your depression by disrupting the structures that you have in your brain, and then they'll reframe them for you. And, and so changing the wave patterns, looking at the functional MRIs, using the mathematics of physics of whatever is a constraint, and then seeing how we can disrupt that pattern a little bit farther, but don't take 4 sniffs, because we just want you to look at the chair differently, not see it melt.
That's good.
And so this has been such because as a pharmacist, people don't want to know about this complexity or any of this information. They want just the drug. So now there is a product that brings complexity right to your nose. And if you don't think that things have changed in how people deal complexity, look at the mechanism of action of Spravato as per Cambridge. It is changing and looking at the superpositioning of particles and how lithium, how this drug affects and frames as per a simple element like lithium. So the underlying thing is there is no construct unless we make it. And if we don't think it's the right thing, we're looking at the structures of the world around us in the wrong way, and we're ruminating on that every day when we get up. Well, if you are suicidal, they're going to give you a spray, but they're not going to look at how the structure of the world around you could be changed. They're just going to wait till you get to the point where you need the spray.
Exactly. I so agree with you. Yes, that's the issue. That's why I like a complex system, because it's the interactions that we're missing, and that's the part that allows emergence and self-organization and to happen. You're so right. Yes. It's like I looked up the other day the word random and found out that the word random came from it's medieval times when somebody was trying to describe a horse. And when you think about it, that horse doesn't see his environment and his context and his world around him as random. He's reacting to the environment. You are so right about this drug. We're just doing it totally out of context. Yeah, this is pretty exciting, you guys. I like where you're going.
Is everybody...
David, I have to go back to Bruce 1 second.
Yeah, okay.
Bruce, so my feeling is you have the right elements to your story. It's way too long right now. And what I did with my story is I created certain attachments where I wanted to go into certain things in more detail. So take a look at what I did, but we want to keep it to around 7,500 words. Bruce?
I'm sorry, I was distracted there for a minute. I couldn't hear the question.
Okay. We want to keep it to around 7,500 words in the body, but I created what happened is when the review team went through it, they felt that certain of the things I brought out were sort of could be put in a addendum. Like, here are 15 things that, okay. So I think you're pretty close to being ready, but I think you need to go through the storyboard, make sure you've got all those points that are in there. take certain things out that you think are, take things out that you don't think are that important. Take other things out that you think are important, but could go in an addendum that would exemplify. For example, I have an addendum where I talk about all the impacts we had on the air traffic control system in detail. So the big impact was that we moved to an evolutionary approach rather than a Big Bang approach. And then I said, and the fact that we did that, we had these seven big successes. You know, we changed them, the way data communication is sent to the aircraft. We changed the way flow management is done, et cetera. And then I put that all in an addendum. And it doesn't hurt the case. So I would like you to try to go through and cut it down to around 700 words and put other stuff in the addendum and get rid of some stuff that is, because it's really a little too long.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and take a look at the length of the piece and you know, certainly work to edit it down to the target number.
Yeah, and then as they say, if you think something's important but could be an addendum where the reader could just go there if they wanted to, that'd be great. So it seems like you're pretty close, Bruce. When do you think you'll have something to submit to the review committee?
Well, if I get lucky, I'll have some time over the next 48 hours to take a crack at this. And
okay, so you're soon. Okay. Next is Susan. You wanted to share some stuff with us, and why don't we do that?
Okay. So can you hear me?
And next, Pooja, I want you to talk a little about the review committee and how it's working, and so that the team knows about it. Okay.
Okay. So I concur. I'm learning so much, and I really appreciate being a part of this, because you know, hearing all the different points of view really brings it home, and also being able to pull in you know, what you guys are saying with, you know, with what else is going out there. And to your point, Connie, I was just listening to a very interesting book. I can't remember the name of it, but anyway, the guy was talking about lean management and how they've studied it, and they figured out that in the U.S., they for some reason they just couldn't figure out why the U.S. was not getting the results that the Japanese was. And what the guy talks about is the fact that we missed the point that it's in the process. It's the process of the learning that, you know, that groups go through in the lean process that actually adds the value, not that end goal. So, you know, so I think you're spot on there. And Mark, I love that reference you just made, because it really kind of gives me a good visual as far as in terms of process and outcomes is your reference to evolutionary versus Big Bang. Yeah, maybe that's where some of it's come from. I want to kind of go through where I'm trying to start. And it's been a great experience just in being able to turn this into a story versus, you know, talking about it in an abstract manner, because it's kind of helped me to really, I think, probably maybe provide a good roadway into some of the more abstract terms. I also want to, in fact, I want to share that briefly and then ask how I might use the storyboard. In other words, how should I take this and apply the storyboard process to really hone in on it, okay?
Susan, one thing you could do is you could take a look in my folder, and I filled out a storyboard so you can see how.
Okay, I'll do that. Yes.
You can see how I used it.
So I'm going to start at the ground level of this story, but then I'm going to say, you know, where I could actually kind of take it up to is chunked up. And so, but I kind of want you guys' opinions on where to frame the story and where to stop at, because It can get, it really, I think this kind of comes back to what Plexus's objective is for reaching the audience is where I'm kind of going with that. So what I've done is I've actually taken so I actually had the whole thing printed out. So I've actually gone through and really enjoyed the Unexpected Gifts book. But I kind of focused in on the specifics of the certain conditions that must be met. In other words, before you can really, it's kind of like you have to prepare people for, I think, the adaptive process, and that's what the book talks about is what conditions have to be present before you're going to be able to move people. So it's almost like, how do you prepare the group? And what I've done is I've taken I've taken a story of a small group that I'm working with. It's a small construction company. And I started working with them about three months ago. They were completely in chaos. They were, very close to having to shut down. And so I started with the leader and started kind of preparing him by actually using my own failings in the past as an entrepreneur. To kind of show him where he was. In fact, first thing I did is I listened to what they were saying, and I went to the board and I basically drew the Cinefin model on the board and said, here is complicated, here is simple, here is complex, and here is chaos. You are here. You are in chaos.
Wow.
And it actually, as I started kind of teaching him and also bringing in my own experience, which is what I'm doing with the scenes. I'm actually kind of creating these scenes where I'm discussing with the client who is suffering in chaos and how it actually gave him a lot of relief to understand that, it wasn't really about his shame. It was about the fact that his organization doesn't have the structure that they need to be able to move beyond this. And so as a business owner, and also the other thing that, and this may be one of the points that you guys say leave out, but I think it's important to address this. If the target audience I'm talking to are business owners, because personally, I discovered when I was like 36 that I have ADHD. Studies are showing that more and more people, especially entrepreneurs, have ADHD. But the problem with ADHD is one, I don't think it's a disease. I think it's I think it's diagnosed so that the pharma can provide medication, which I take. But the point is that we can be creative, but it's because we don't have a rigid structure in our minds. But when you couple that with societal beliefs that, this back to the Newtonian, back to the you're a strong man or you're the Superman, that you have all the answers, what that does is it puts a lot of shame on what we perceive to be failures in business, and mainly because we don't recognize it's an adaptive system and we are a player in it. We don't have the control over others. So, so I kind of start out with, my point with him, how I arrived here, and then I'm kind of going back to my own experience. And what I'm trying to do is I'm setting up what is, quite frankly, typical in organizations, but I'm kind of showing anti-patterns. I'm showing, here are the problems, back to your point, Mark, is I'm saying, here are the problems that are occurring. Now let's prepare to be able to move forward. So, I've taken, a compelling problem or challenge exists. And then I'm moving on to, in each one of these, I'm turning into a scene, both in terms of how I'm working with the organization and how the struggles that I personally created for myself, because I didn't really realize I was in an adaptive situation. Efforts to improve have been tried in only moderate or intermediate. Data exists that reflect the severity, extent, and intractable nature of the problem. Dedicated time and space is committed to discovery, confrontation, and sharing. And that's where I had to bring the group together and get them to, one, give them a safe space to vent, because they needed to release that trauma before they could, in effect, actually even think about being a team. Leaders and community members must be willing to engage the whole system to solve the problem. And what I did is I had to say to this business owner, it's not about you. You don't have the answers. Until you can tap into your group's collective intelligence, you're not going to have the answers. That's the beauty of it. And he had to actually become much more vulnerable, because he had shut himself off. And by virtue of that, they had pushed him away. So
Can I say something?
Yeah.
You are bringing up what I consider one of the things that I don't read enough in complexity, and that is the psychological growth that you have to go through to deal with complexity. What I learned is we all psychologically want to have a sense of control. And to be effective in dealing with a complex system, one has to deal with that vulnerability head on. And I'm so happy you're bringing this up, because I think this is one of the crucial points of how you deal with this. Dealing with self-knowledge and understanding one's own vulnerabilities and
limitations.
When I had to trust the organization, the people and the staff, I couldn't control whether something would totally fail. I mean, I could do my best to not put people in who were, who I didn't trust. But, this illusion that somehow if I could control everything, it would work out is one of the great things. So what you're bringing up is, for me, so powerful and so important in the whole, and I don't read enough about that in complexity theory, about the psychological struggle it is to manage effectively in a complex system.
Well, good. So this was a fruitful process for me to go through, because I was able to actually connect it and turn it into some practical things. And hopefully it will be a story that one, business people who are in the process will, one, recognize that, which is kind of my big aha moment, is that I can't force. As a practitioner, I can't force their process. I had to come to terms with the fact that they had to do it on their own, and they had to do it at their own pace. So it was powerful for me in not getting my own disappointment wrapped up in my expectations for them. So thank you. And so I'll have to continue writing it out. I just did a word check, and so I've already got like 1,000 words, and so 7,500. I can kind of dig deep into each one of these things that says, if you don't have this element, you're not going to be able to move forward effectively. In other words, you're going to have a lot of oscillation. In fact, back to your point, Mark, I found something really interesting about systems thinking. And in fact, what they said is that the reason why people reject systems thinking is because it threatens their leadership identity.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. It threatens the whole narrative.
Yeah.
It makes emotional growth to do this.
Well, but it's also this gentleman it's a relief to him.
I know.
Because it's not his fault. It's not. He's got so much shame that he shut himself down. And that's what I did. So, I mean, I can relate to it. And I can also touch him to where he can stay with it. I mean, it's like I just really had to sit with him for like a couple of hours and just like, don't stuff it. Don't stuff it. You know, let's feel it.
Well, Susan, that resonates with me because of working in the schools. There's a continuum of attention deficit. And when you have a very rigid teacher, they're not willing to adapt their structure. And so she might have many people on Ritalin. But if you have a dynamic teacher who is willing to understand these concepts and oscillate between structure and not for different children, you do not need the drug.
Right. Well,
so that becomes the problem in our society sometimes too. So so I just like it that you did take it to psychology, as Mark said, because good. I think that is the elephant in the room.
Well, and to the thing about the paradox is that I grew up in a home that didn't have a lot of structure. So whereas I know people who have ADHD where they luckily were able to model structure in their lives, and it made a huge difference because that when we talk about discipline. Yeah, it really has a lot to do with how we modeled in our families growing up. And so you can't have no discipline or no structure because then you just end up in chaos, which is kind of where this company was. And now I can kind of say, you got to have the flexibility to adapt. You can't, in other words, I think part of the rigidness is it kind of comes back to valuing the process and not the outcomes. Mm-hmm. And so thank you for that. And so I'll kind of focus on this now, where I'm asking for your help in terms of chunking up a level, okay? And it may just be that I just need to write this out and kind of see how long it is, because you may have given me the context for how to shorten it, but is another project that I'm working on, which is just fascinating, and it speaks to what all of you were talking about earlier, is I'm working with a international group of enterprise architects. So this is all IT people who are architects of the IT, the technical side. But they're all engineers, Mark, so they're all very, very linear. Everything's a map, okay? Everything has a point and a line to here. But yet they have just the concept of the value of the process. And so there's a group of about 8 of us that are getting together, and we're trying to figure out how to bridge all the different disciplines. And so I've got you guys who are knowledgeable in that process, and then you've got this other group of people who are all when you look at the digital transformation. Okay, that's kind of when we talk about technology, companies adapting technology. The new term is digital transformation, and companies are going to have a little bit of both. So this kind of comes back to a company's capacity. There's a lot of paradoxes, and understanding how to, back to your point, Bob, is understanding that to try to put too much rigid structure is actually counterintuitive, right? Because what's happening is these architects, they're coming in and they're thinking that coming back to the outcomes and the goals, is that they're starting with the assumption that the leaders have a concrete strategy. And because the leaders, for the most part, are winging it, everything crumbles they end up creating a whole lot of artifacts and a whole lot of really pretty maps. But because they do not appreciate the process of engaging everyone in the process of designing the organization, we're seeing 85% failure rates of digital transformations for business owners.
Hey, Susan, I'm confused about that. There's a very well accepted approach now, which is very similar to complexity thinking, which is called Agile, AGILE. Read about it.
I've been to plenty of Agile, and the problem is that Agile works great in teams. Teams, the goal for teams is to create a project, but leadership is different. Leadership has to adapt to the market conditions.
Right.
So so do you understand where I'm saying though? Is that the difference between when you're talking about business ownership, it demands a much more agile. It demands a much more adaptive approach because the environment is so much more complex than just working on a team and working on a software project.
But it's still, I still think you need some of the same concepts of learning and evolution, and not having such a rigid roadmap that's,
Absolutely.
got some of the same qualities, but it's different because it's not, a team is not necessarily developing the whole business structure, concept.
Well, and so this is kind of where this could be a whole nother book, quite frankly. And so I'm hesitant to even introduce it because it could dilute the story I'm trying to tell.
Well, I did something like that in mine, and I put it in an attachment. I talked about, I have attachment 3, which is about very much David's concept about the interplay between a hierarchy and a network.
Okay, well, good. Well, now I may be able to.
That's what I did.
Because really
how I found so many people arguing about, do we have a hierarchy or do we have a network? And
okay.
They both work together. It's a yin yang, just that's like in David's book. I mean, it's a very profound concept that.
Yes.
And even the hierarchy has flexibility, and the network has structure. It's not as if, they're two opposite things. They're kind of together. So,
absolutely. Okay.
Susan, I have to ask you, when do you think you would have a draft ready for the review committee?
So I'll, to your point, what I'll do is I'm just going to really focus and bring out the internal structure that needs to change. And that's really what we're talking about in terms of the mental model of understanding.
Well, use the storyboard. That really helps, I think.
Okay, I'll do that. And so I think I will shoot for having this ready for, I guess, the review board.
Yes.
I'm thinking that I could have the story. I'll say, once I put it on my calendar, if I put it off too long, then it's never going to happen. So I need structure. So if I said that I could probably get the basics of this story done in 3 weeks, and that way they'd have a week for the review board. Is that
what I would do? Is I would put together I would do the storyboard first, which is sort of an outline. Okay. Do the storyboard first, and then within 3 to 5 weeks, you'd have a draft.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm pretty much done with the draft. We just kind of went through the draft.
Okay, but send your storyboard to the review committee. Just
okay. So I'll get the storyboard out within a week.
Okay. So I want to go to Bob, and then I want to go to Prucha to talk about the whole review process. So Bob, where are you?
Oh my goodness. I'm having so much fun, with you guys and some other folks that I think there's such a tipping point of what we're trying to do. Where am I at? I'm crystallizing this, but far as getting it together, it's evolving so quickly because of like that drug. Now I can know I can really go back to really where I was trying to put everything I was working in the schools at nothing more than ever a 5th grade level. That people would understand the motions of these very complex kids within the dynamics of the routines and patterns they were embedded in their homes and in their communities and their schools. And if that didn't work, and they were not fitting those structures, and the parents were not seeing the structures, and the teachers were not seeing the structures that were causing these kids to act the way they did, they would give them a drug. And so now, I mean, we have a new drug out there that if you don't see the patterns, or if you're ruminating in the patterns, and every morning you get up and you're more and more depressed, you're going to get to a certain point where that drug is wonderful. Otherwise, you're going to commit suicide. So then, and so that information, so Stanford now looks at your functional MRI, and they're treating your depression at 5 years of age by seeing where the pattern is. And so that sort of thing, I know no one wants to know about, but the power is understanding how that young child is operating within the constructs of the environment they have, and how as adults and teachers, we have the ability to be dynamic in framing that information and understanding where they're at on the point of just being able to learn without having complete chaos, and we can frame that world. And so if you just go right to the construct of looking at business, it's the same thing. If you can have a vision of what your business should do, but the leaders have to look at the complexity of the world they're trying to compete in, and then come back and reframe it for the people that they're working in, and give enough structure so that they can compete with the chaos that's out there.
So Bob, when do you think you could have the storyboard filled out for the review committee, and then write a draft again?
Okay, I would like to push this off into June, like I think Connie said, because the things I'm talking about are not. I'm dealing with real people about these concepts, and it's so exciting.
So June, can we have the storyboard, and maybe in July the draft?
Oh yeah, that would be wonderful.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. Hey, Prusha, could you talk a little bit about your experience about the review committee and what the review committee is doing and how it works?
Okay. Also, Denise had asked me to talk a little bit about the difference between a story and a case study.
Yes.
The case studies, many of which are on the website, are about specific projects where there was, a specific situation and a certain problem that we were dealing with, and there's things that are finished and had an outcome. The stories don't necessarily have to be something that structured. It's more, it can be a retrospective, as Mark's was. Mark did a retrospective analysis of a very successful project in which he recognized the complexity principles were used. So that's a beautiful example of a complexity story. So that's that's those things. So as far as the work of the review committee, Brooke Walter developed the storyboard with Denise, and it's been very useful. It's a very good tool for organizing your thoughts. And I think one of the things we look for is an engaging narrative that helps to explain the abstractions that are involved. So it's not necessary to go into a huge amount of detail, but it's helpful to have enough of a story to support the abstractions that you're talking about. And that's one of the things we look for. And I guess other than that, it's just, I just like to say, Connie, we were excited about your story. It was great. We all thought it was quite fascinating. So don't think nobody was excited. That was great.
No, I think people were excited. I
Yes,
agree with that.
absolutely.
That wasn't the issue that we had.
Yeah. Well, I just want Connie to know that we were excited about it. We got a little. And other than that, I think I mean, the guidelines pretty much cover what we're looking for and what we try to do.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize, for me, how important the storyboard was. The storyboard doesn't tell you you have to do everything in a particular order, and this is chapter one, subsection 1 is this, and subsection 2 is this, but it makes you think about some of the key points about, what do you think the story is about? What are your reflections about it? What evidence do you have to back you up? What are the key moments? It's sort of, it's a checklist. How did it affect your organization? How did it affect you? One of the things that's different about this than I think a pure academic is that this is really, is if you were going to tell a friend a really important story to illustrate how complexity has affected your life and the way you're thinking, it comes across that way. When I was at my company, instead of like reading the mission statement and the 5 things, I would tell stories to people about what we had gone through, very similar to my story. And their eyes would become really wide open. I mean, it really excited them. So, I think this is the way we're trying to communicate with the world. And from that, hopefully people will come to us and say, hey, Plexus, offer me, because I really want to move forward from where I'm at. And the other thing is, Denise is saying, in some sense, Plexus is a way to operationally deal with complexity. It's a more practical organization. It's not trying to compete with the theorists and the academic world, but it's not trying to avoid academic ideas. It's just trying to say, hey, we're about practically helping you change your way of thinking and your organization. So these stories are one aspect of letting people know that there is ways of doing it. So that's where we are.
One thing, if I could just say something else about Susan mentioned looking at unexpected gifts. One of the things about that, we use a huge number of lists, and a lot of it is repetitive, and that was by design, because it's kind of a manual. It's a manual rather than a story. So these processes are repetitive. Sometimes you end up doing the same thing 2 or 3 times and noting differences. So that's why the repetition was sort of built into the list. And also, I think one of the sort of different things that we're looking for in this is stories as opposed to a manual type of approach.
Okay. Anybody else got some final words?
I will say that I have found a fantastic, if you're interested in engaging with other liberating structure practitioners, there's a wonderful Slack group. I think you can find them, a link to it on the liberating structures, but lots of really cool practitioners that are using liberating structures in a lot of different ways that you can engage with, and ask them questions about which the beauty is like a deck of cards, but the challenge is putting the cards together, because you don't just use one liberating structure, you actually have to blend them together.
Okay, everybody. Hey, how do we save the Zoom chat? Is there some way to do that?
Yes, it'll when you cut it off, it'll actually say don't turn off your computer, because it actually backs up the recording after the call.
Okay. Okay, everybody. This was a great meeting, and
Yes, thanks for.
Please, if you have time, read the final version in my folder about the ATC. You'll get a sense of how things evolved and what at least the review committee and at least I think is a good story now.
Awesome.
Okay.
I think it's okay, Mark, except I don't think all of our stories are going to be exactly alike.
No, I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
Please, I don't want to make a point that's one of the reasons we're not making this into like a coherent book right now. It's that all the stories can be different, but the ideas, I mean, the thought about the personal aspects of it, what,
But this kind of goes against the whole philosophy of complexity, which is diversity.
no, I'm not saying that I'm not saying that it's all the same. The stories are different and all that. But we do have an overriding principle, which is we're telling a story and not a exposition on a model or something like that. The model and all that.
I get it. I just don't want to. I don't want people to feel too squeezed.
No. That's one of the reasons we're not even thinking book right now, because we want to see how things emerge, is how the different stories are. Then we'll look at it and say, hey, does this work as a book or does it work as just a bunch? Because we don't.
I just want to say one more big thank you to everybody. I so enjoy these meetings. So we're not really going to have any more now for a while.
Oh, we will.
Okay.
Once we get a couple of these stories together, I want us to all read them and then talk about where we think they are and if there are any common messages. So in the next, I think we're going to have at least 2 or 3 more stories done in the next month.
Yeah.
The review committee. So I think we'll have a series of stories, and then I'm going to ask everybody to read them, and I'm going to ask people, hey, what are we getting from this? I mean, see, this is part of the learning process. I mean, we've really come a long way, even though the beginning took a long time. Who are we? What are we doing? And all that. And this is a perfect example. As we worked, we then had thinking to chew on rather than just saying, well, what do we think it should be? And now things are really emerging.
Yeah, and there's a lot of trust, I think, among the group.
Yes. And it's wonderful. But one of the things
anyway,
I
have to run, but thank you.
Yes. And Susan, I'm so impressed with the understanding of how the emotional aspects of leadership really affects this. It's a really powerful, profound point, and I really hope your story brings that out.
Oh, good. Okay.
To say before Connie left is that one of the things I'm working on is event, behavior, structure, and the mental model below. And if anyone wants to explore what their mental model is to frame the story, I'd be interested, because I will just tell you my mental model is very dynamic, and I'm reframing as I go. Part of it is these conversations, and so that, I think, is part of what we're trying to do with our book, is what is the common denominators of our mental model so that our stories are rich across all of it.
Yes, and I think when we get a bunch of these stories done, we can take a look at it and say, hey, what's common?
Yeah, well, those are all the fast-moving cognitive mental model, whatever you want to call it, adaptive cycles, right? Where you reorganize and you kind of go into conservation because you really like what you're doing, and then all at once something else comes up, like we have this meeting, and then you release. And it's only according to complexity, it's only in the stage of release where there is the most resilience, because that's the only time when you really want to change.
Right.
And it took me years to just self-discover that. I thought, where does resilience fit in here? And then I realized, I finally, in Holling's book, saw the third dimension of the complex adaptive cycle is resilience. So resilience gets stronger when you release, and resilience is the least. There's less resilience when you're in the conservation stage. And you could take Mark's story and, for example, show how the whole aviation industry was in low resilience, and that's one word that could be added to that story. And so how by releasing and going through all those management events, the organization became more resilient. So yeah, your mental model is just a zillion little adaptive cycles.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, everybody.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Terrific.
Thank you. Okay,
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, I heard
You're still there, Mark?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I gotta end the recording.
Okay, end the recording. A good meeting, I thought.
Yeah,
Excellent.
thank you.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, Mark.
Bye-bye.
Bye.